Gormagad go hiúla agus tá fáilte ród ar chuige an plé investiacht I service an óga. Look, I don't think I have to convince anyone here of the benefits of youth work, what it does for young people. It builds their confidence and it develops skills. And it builds relationships, healthy relationships importantly, and supports positive mental health. We see emotional support, resilience, and it encourages community involvement. And the fact that it's voluntary, not obligatory like school as well, makes all the difference. People choose to attend whatever youth club is in their area or youth project. And it's usually flexible in that it sets out to meet the needs of the young people in the area, the participants in the club. But for youth work to be successful, there is a need for proper financial investment and to maintain both the existing levels of service and for capital investment as well. So I will acknowledge there's been moderate increases in funding over the last few years in the different budgets, but it's not sufficient to maintain existing service levels because it's been negated by inflation and increased employer costs and indeed population growth. And I mean, the annual City of Dublin actual cost exercise found that there was an 8.1 shortfall in necessary funding for youth services. And 88% of respondents to the National Youth Council of Ireland survey recently, they were all youth groups affiliated to the National Youth Council, felt, actually answered that they were very concerned about insufficient funding. And if you don't have insufficient funding, you're going to have issues with the provision of the service. And there are issues. There are issues with recruitment. There are issues with retention of youth workers. So the staff are under pressure. They're under time pressure. They're time poor. They're on reduced hours and indeed reduced spaces. But the need is growing at the same time. And in relation to funding streams, some of them are quite difficult to manage, and there's often significant disparities between allocated budgets and the true costs of delivery. So we find that many of those, whether they're employed as youth workers within services or they're voluntary youth workers, they're spending their time worrying about, covering the costs and their overheads and the rent and so on, because everything is increasing in cost. And I want to thank the National Youth Council of Ireland for their engagement on this, and they've done a lot of work and research with all of the participants. And the current investment in existing level of service is 90 million per year, and they're proposing an increase of 13 million on that. It's a 15% increase to actually just, I suppose, stabilise the service. They just feel it's under pressure at the moment and it needs to be stabilised, and increased funding will do that. Because they will recognise there's a need for multi-annual funding to allow planning and certainty, but first they want a steady stream of investment so that they can stabilise what's there, that they can consolidate on the ground, get a good base going, and then they can look at expanding from there. In relation to capital funding, where there is are already dedicated spaces, many of them are ageing buildings with problems and with issues, and they're in need of upgrade, and there isn't sufficient funding to actually address that. Now, I attended Youth Work Ireland had a presentation over in the Freemasons Hall today, and I was talking to people there from my own area of Cavan and Monaghan, and I was talking to one youth worker who works in Clonus, and they have a wonderful youth service there, but it is an older building. It was an old school at one time, an old primary school, so it was given to them, it's rented to them by the diocese. But the roof is leaking and has been for years. There's a lot of damage done to the building, and they can't afford it, they can't access funding to repair it. So they need to be able to repair that building. But that's not possible at the moment. I was talking to another young person there, and she was telling me in her Froga club there are around 20 members. There are about 15 on a waiting list, but they can't accommodate them because the space they meet in is so small, and they need a bigger space. So the need is there, but they can't meet the need. So we see this all over where the spaces are there, but they need upgrading, or we need new spaces, or we need increased spaces. Not everywhere needs their own space. They can rent a facility, but getting one that's sufficient in size is often difficult as well. So we need to see an increase in the capital expenditure. And the National Development Plan, only 20 million of the National Development Plan money that was allocated to the Department of Education and Youth, out of 7.55 billion, which is 0.0265%, went to youth. I mean, that's like, That's very, very little. So it's 4 million per year for this year up until 2030. And again, there's no sign of that money. So maybe, Minister, you can elaborate on when even that 4 million is becoming available, because all money is welcome and will do good, but it's not sufficient to meet the need, and there needs to be a much increased investment. And again, the National Youth Council are suggesting an additional 13 million in capital funding as well, so to bring it up to 17 million per year for the next 4 years. The Young Persons Facility and Services Fund was established a number of years ago to attract at-risk young people in disadvantaged areas, especially those where there were significant drug problems. And we need to see that, strengthened, but we also need to extend that, because there are other harms now for young people. And we see online, we see rural and social isolation, we see mental health pressures and the impacts of poverty. So again, a fund, a €75 million fund for that service there to help people at risk who are in disadvantaged areas would be very, very welcome. In relation to opportunities for youth, it's the National Strategy for Youth Work and Related Services. It was launched in 2024, September, I think 2024, so that was prior to the general election. There's no implementation plan for that yet, and we're 19 months into that strategy. Now, I have no issue with the strategy. There's very good objectives in it, but they're not we cannot be realised unless we strengthen the existing services and we have an implementation plan. And I can't understand launching a strategy without an implementation plan. And actually, the current plan is for just this year, and we're already into our 4th month of this year and no sign of an implementation plan. And I just fear there's going to be a rush to try and reach the objectives that are laid down in that plan, and that it's going to become a box-ticking exercise and a race through. So I do question the governance of the implementation of the plan. And there's currently no National Youth Work Advisory Committee established either. That was supposed to be established and was established under the Youth Work Act, but it's not in existence at the moment. And that was established to consult with the Minister in relation to youth work. Now, there's talk about setting up 2 separate groups. They're not yet established as well. So I want to see that that's done in partnership with the sector and ensure that those working groups, can work with the Minister, can work to implement this plan, but they can't do that, as I said, without proper investment, and that is vitally needed. As I said, I met with the Corlin and Og reps earlier over at the Youth Work Ireland, and it was very interesting talking to them, and they were very, very capable young people. And I was asking them what are their acts. And it wasn't specifically to do with youth work, but they're involved in Corlin and Og, which is outside of school, even though it's facilitated through the school programme. But they're also involved in Frog, and like as I said, they were talking about the lack of capacity. But one of the things they said was, why can we not have a leap card for young people to access public transport? So they said they have a ticket to, especially in rural areas, they have a ticket to get on the school bus to go to school. Why could there not be some sort of a ticket that they can use on the school bus, but also use, that they can buy, obviously, that they've used on the school bus, but they can also use on the local link, or they can use on bus Éireann services. They also talked to me about the lack of funding for buses for trips. Bus coach hire has got extremely expensive, and I've heard this from groups from the elderly to the young, to go anywhere on sort of day trips or anything like that. And they're saying there's some areas in Dublin, in Froga clubs, I think, have specified buses, and that they can transport them to, Emerald Park or wherever they're going for the day. Whereas if the people from Cavan and Monaghan want to get up there, it's very expensive. It costs hundreds of euros just to rent a coach for the day to go, and they don't have the money. And so they're just looking if there could be more investment in buses for youth activities, to bring them on trips and to different things like that. And one other thing they mentioned, and it's to do with schools, the Minister's still within your remit, counselling in schools. They feel that there's too much emphasis put on the guidance counsellor to provide counselling services. They're not often qualified counsellors, they're qualified guidance counsellors, but they're not qualified counsellors. And they often say they don't want to talk to the same person they're talking to about the education as they may have with their issues or the mental health issues or wherever they want help with. So that was something else that was brought up. So there's, I am interested in hearing more about exactly when it is planned to have the implementation plan, how it's going to be implemented. We want to see the objectives reached, but I don't think that's possible, as I said, without the plan and without the proper investment. Thank you, Minister.